I think when the African American Catholic bishops wrote their pastoral letter, what we have seen and heard, they nailed it. They talked about 4 gifts: the gift of contemplation, a spirituality that's rooted in a contemplative stance, which in their expression of it, and I think in the African American cultural expression of it, means that every place is a fit place for prayer. And I can say, I look back at spending time with my great grandmother. She'd pray at the drop of a hat. We'd be in the store in downtown Carrollton, and she'd find something on sale, or somebody would do something. She'd say, she'd start praying, whether it's just one of these little short spiritual ejaculations or whatever. So the contemplative stance, I think if they're from this community and they've been in a good parish situation, whether it's predominantly African American or more multicultural, they should have that gift. I think also the gift of joy, which is not Pollyannish refusal to deal with the verities of life and reality. I talk very specifically to some of our young men, as I had to do with one of my nephews. My sister's oldest child, she's in a biracial marriage. And so my nephew's family are old Indiana Republicans. His great-grandfather was Wendell Willkie, who ran for president against Roosevelt. And so at one point, my brother-in-law says to me, "Manuel, I need you to have a talk with Nathan." And I said, "Well, what talk is that, Ben?" He says, "Nathan, in Hawaii where they live, he's just like everybody else, multiracial, multicultural. But when he comes back to the mainland, he's clearly identified as a black kid." He says, "So I need you to have that talk with him about what that means in terms of should he ever be stopped by the police, when he finds himself in environments where he's the only person of color, etc." He said, "I can't do that. I haven't had that experience, but you can. He loves you. You love him." So despite having to do those kinds of talks, there is still a deep-seated joy, I think, is part of black spirituality, African American spirituality. So contemplation, joy. I think it's also the focus, and I think we can do it and still be open to other traditions, as we live in this age of so much Islamophobia and different things. But we're Christ-centered. It's a Christocentric faith. When you look at our spirituals, when you look at the religious imagery, when you even read popular novels, I teach in the summers at the Institute for Black Catholic Studies at Xavier. And this past summer, I didn't have an afternoon class, so I sat in on one of the classes. We had a very fine young scholar from Rhodes College who's an expert on James Baldwin. And we read and dissected 2 or 3 of Baldwin's novels, and I had an awareness of how deeply rooted in the Bible and in Christianity so much of black culture is. But even in a writer like James Baldwin, who most people would not identify as a practicing Christian, it was so much a part of his experience, and the idioms and the prism through which he dealt with issues that made sense. And so I would talk about that. I think a young man coming from this parish or from a vibrant African American Catholic Church experience would feel comfortable with a Christocentric religion. And then the fourth characteristic, besides the joy, besides contemplation, besides Christocentrism, is that whole idea of hope. That despite our history, it still speaks of progress, of hope, of joy, of progress. And it's hope rooted in the awareness that God is always part of the equation, and that the victory ultimately is assured, whether it was the Middle Passage, whether it was enslavement, whether it was Jim Crow, whether it was the Civil Rights struggle, whether it's the contemporary culture that we live in now. There's no reason to give up hope. I think they can bring those gifts to the church. To a young African-American man who might be, or at least is open to the possibility of considering Catholic priesthood, it is a great life. It is a way for them to impact the whole church in a most powerful and unique way. But it's also an extremely unique and powerful way to impact the lives of African American people. If you look at our history in the South and across this country, then you have to acknowledge the role that clergy. Martin Luther King was a great orator, a great theologian, a great scholar, but he was first and foremost a preacher. And he was a pastor. He was a pastor here in Montgomery. And it was in his role as pastor that lay people, E.D. Nixon and Rufus Lewis, chose him and said, with your credentials and your speaking ability and your youth, you're the one we need. But it was because he was a pastor, it's because he was a man of the gospel that they chose him. And so when you look at what's happening in our country, look at what's happening in our world, then the voice of studied, intelligent, deliberate, with all the richness of the Catholic tradition, melded with all the richness of the African American culture and the African American Catholic tradition in this part of the country, it becomes a powerful force for change. I have been blessed to be able to serve in some national organizations and to do some things around the country that extend beyond Resurrection Parish and extend beyond the Archdiocese of Mobile. And there is a hunger, there's a need, there's an opportunity, and there is a capacity for that young man to make a singular contribution, again, not only to African American people, African American Catholic people in general, but to the country. And I think I know that there are young men here in this church who I think are looking for ways to serve. And I think the most important thing that I can do is remind them of that possibility, but also to share with them honestly that it has been a great life. It is a great life. But just like married life or single life, there have been and will be challenges. We had a brother of the Sacred Heart who, of happy memory now, who taught in our school for about 6 or 7 years. And Brother Brian was his name. And he had a unique way of encouraging people to have vocations. And I heard him say to one of the teenagers in the parish one time, go to the mall. And the young man said, well, what am I going to do? He says, sit down in the middle of the mall. He says, now watch all these people who are walking up and down the mall. He said, what do you see when you see them? And so the kid says, well, they have bags and they're shopping and they're doing things. He said, do you see them bouncing off the ceiling and running around happy? Are they all smiling? Are they all just filled with glee and joy? And every day is a party? And the kid says, no, he's not. He said, well, most of those folks are married. Most of them have relationships. He said, it's just a normal life. He said, my brotherhood and Father's priesthood or whatever, he said, it's just a normal life. We have some of the same challenges, some of the same joys. And said, so you can do it. Believe me, you can do it. That would be my message to him. You can do it.